Thank you very much.
Hello. That was two skinny, middle-aged rural Jews walking to a bookstore. I'm Nick, I'm the one with the English accent. This is Andrew, the one with the American accent.
Hello, good to be here. I'm just going to say that I stumbled onto Nick's work maybe 2 or 3 years ago. When did you first? And I was just stunned by the imagery in many ways. It was very much, it presented all kinds of contrasts to other pictures that I've been writing about, in writing about what's going on with African wildlife. It was elegant, but at the same time you started to understand the shocking background behind the story. So I was really thrilled when he got in touch about the new book and about this conversation. And I'm going to let him go from there, and then we're just going to have a conversation as the pictures unfurl. So go for it.
Well, actually, Andrew asked me to begin at the beginning. So we went right back to 2002. When I first went to Africa, it was kind of a honeymoon period where I saw it as sort of a paradise. And so for the first few years, I mean, this is kind of, we began with this photograph, this sort of a vision of paradise, using infrared film to kind of highlight that. And that's just kind of how I saw it, even though I always knew it was an elegy to a vanishing world. There was still this honeymoon period where I just wanted to show this beauty before it disappeared. So there were, right from the outset, I was taking portraits of animals very much as you would take portraits of a human being. I really don't differentiate between the portraiture of animals and human beings. So it's just was waiting for that moment when animals appear to basically present themselves for their portrait.
Can you pull the mic back a little bit from your mouth? I think it's a little...
Is that better? Yeah? Okay. And this was, when even, I hardly ever shoot in cloud, and back in those days even sunlight was kind of acceptable. So as you can see, it was just basically portraiture, not using telephoto lenses, using medium format film, and just regarding it as the portraiture of sentient creatures not so different from me.
Can you describe a little bit about the process? Because again, they remind me more of Richard Avedon than of one of the conventional wildlife photography. But they're in the field. So how did you do that?
Well, I first of all, I take that as a compliment. I love Richard Avedon as one of my heroes. So that's thank you.
Totally, that's what it is.
It's really just a mindset, I think, where I've always shot with a medium format camera, looking into the ground glass, just like you would in a studio, with portraiture of a human being. And like I said, it's just waiting for that moment of connection, spending a lot of time with each creature and selecting them. I mean, what I often say is, you're walking down the street and you see this incredible face, somebody who looks like, say, Samuel Beckett, and they are compelling and riveting, and you just have to photograph them. And it's the same with, with certain animals. So I just can go back on this.
Yeah,
so this lion, I completely was fascinated and compelled to take his particular portrait, not a lion's portrait, that lion's portrait. So that was a 17-day wait. This cheetah and her family, there was just something about her. She was also so relaxed, she actually jumped up on the roof of the car and licked my face one day. And one of the cubs jumped in through the driver's passenger window, and we had to kind of push him up through the roof hatch. So it's
and that one, again, to catch the dust in that moment with a medium format camera seems to me a very hard thing to do. Like, how many efforts did that take? Or
it's not that many. I mean, I'm always been very selective. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is the thing. It's kind of this whole notion of the decisive moment in photography, it sort of grieves me that with the onset of technology where you can just basically roll video and you have such a good resolution, the decisive moment doesn't even kind of necessarily need to exist anymore.
Right.
So, and then this one we'll get on to later.
That was one of the ones I put on my blog at the Times because of the backstory, which you'll hear.
Yeah, I mean, we'll go. This is Igor, who was glorious, and he got killed 2 years after this photograph was taken. We'll come back to that. And then this is kind of back to this paradise. This, I just spent years trying to get the kind of the perfect line of elephants crossing through the grass, but this was the best that I could get. But the point is that line of elephants, reality kind of set in, that starting in 2008, poaching dramatically increased as a result of the demand for ivory from Asia and various Asian countries. And the elephants just began to get wiped out to such a fast degree that this fairly quickly transmogrified literally into that. And so this was taken 3 years later in 2011, and now I'm starting to get a bit more depressed and angry about everything when you see how I began. And those are the tusks of elephants killed at the hands of man. And they're being held by the rangers of Big Life Foundation, the foundation I co-founded. Those tusks at the front, which are those tusks as well, there is no elephant left alive in Africa with tusks that size. They've all been killed. They probably would reach in excess of $500,000 today in Africa. And it's just kind of hard to imagine what that elephant looked like. I mean, how he even kind of walked without them dragging in the earth. In fact, maybe they did drag in the earth. So that's where I left off the trilogy of books, On This Earth, A Shadow Falls, Across the Ravaged Land, that ended this kind of decade of photographs that then we go into the next body of work, Inherit the Dust.
Before you go forward, I want you to click back a little bit. Not click back literally, but what drew you to this art form? There's many different things. You had mentioned to me earlier that you always loved music. So what made you choose a visual form, and then what got you to Africa?
Well, I was no good at music.
Well, that could be.
It's my first love was always animals and the natural world. And I was in Africa shooting part of a music video for Michael Jackson called Earth Song. And I just fell in love with the place. And I realized that all these years of being incredibly frustrated, not being able to express my feelings about animals and the natural world, I was able to potentially through photography. So animals were my first love, and photography was merely the medium with which to express my feelings about them. And so that's when I started on this journey that, as we see now, we've gone from honeymoon to kind of stark reality of present day.
Yeah, okay, so now take us through the next stage.
So Andy asked me to just put together sort of some setup shots for the new series, Inherit the Dust. So the idea was, for this new work, to shoot these life-size panels of animals in the places where these animals used to roam but no longer do. So back in California where I live, we started printing life-size panels of unreleased photographs and just kind of testing them at life size. And then shipping them over to Kenya and then building them on site. We had to just glue these strips onto these panels and just start, as I say, each location, build this giant rhino shot or giraffe, elephant, whatever. and then the panels would get carried through to each location.
And which country is this?
This is all shot in Kenya, all around Kenya. That's me shooting one, and one going up. And just what's interesting about this shot is, I mean, it's just an iPhone photo, but it's taken in sunlight, and I think it gives you an idea of just how I think crap it looks in shot in sunlight. Whereas when we get to the final shot and waiting for suitably stormy apocalyptic skies for each shot, not only that it ties in with the somber, moody, melancholy light of the original portraits, but it is more in keeping with the tone that I'm trying to set. And then in each case, each location being lined up to the horizon line to match. And panels frequently had to get built up so the horizon line matched up. This location was in central Kenya, in a place called Nakuru, giant dump site. And these people all live on the periphery of this dump site, and it's really quite disturbing how they have to live. When the garbage trucks roll up, they just are sifting through that garbage for rotting food that they just eat right there and then alongside the pigs. I mean, you can see in the photograph, you can see pigs, goats, marabou storks. It's just everybody's sort of fighting for this same, literally these same scraps of food. And for me, the point was that human beings are victims of environmental degradation as well as the animals. This was in the same location. This river of garbage. I actually spent months looking for a location where the contours of the hills would line up, and just discovered this by complete mistake. And actually that photo of those rhinos was only taken about 10 miles away, in the fenced park, this Nakuru Park. That's that same lion that you saw earlier, just from a different, outtake, as it were. And this is this dump site is basically these kids' playground. I mean, that's what you see. That's kind of where they play.
Yeah.
It's pretty awful. So that's that. The development. I had added this photo just because this development is out of control. It's kind of going through this burgeoning megalopolis that seems like a couple of 100 kilometers of the central highlands of Kenya. It feels like a cross between China and India. And this isn't a town in decay. This is shooting up. A couple of years ago, this was savanna with gazelles and zebras and impala, and now this was shooting up at such a speed that when I scouted it 3 weeks before I shot, I had to ask the people who were doing construction to just go around the other side and construct the backside, and so that it would still be the same when I got back 3 weeks later. It's just happening so fast. And one of the things that it's worth asking is, an African will say, well, you guys, you destroyed your natural resources for the sake of your economy, and now it's basically our turn to mine, and they'd be completely justified in saying that. The point is that a couple of things. Number one, we've already lost our megafauna, so theirs is still there. But their megafauna, their natural world, is a source of extraordinary economic benefit. They can be a global superpower when it comes to nature tourism. But
although I will say, when I was looking at these, I was taken back to some of the stuff I've written about North America, and I looked just a couple of days ago. I looked at the historic range of the bison, included Chicago, and there were tens of millions of bison roaming that area. And some of this gets me thinking about, partially, is there a way do we have to always replicate that pattern in every part of the world as it goes through a development phase from a rural agrarian to an urban economy? Do we always have to forget about nature and then remember it too late? Actually, with the bison, it's not too late. They're coming back, but there are other fauna that were lost in North America through that period. And so that's one of the things that haunts me about these images, is this question of, is it just part of what humans do?
It really, if you try and be completely pragmatic, there is such sense to preserving this, because in so many parts of this part of the world, once you take away the wildlife, once you take away, you destroy these ecosystems, you're basically left with semi-desert, where all that's left is land for livestock. And with increasing number of droughts, with climate change, there are just more and more terrifying die-offs of the drought in 2009 killed about 80% of the wildlife, of the livestock. So with the benefit of prior knowledge, yeah, you would hope that a really forward-thinking government, would kind of realize the long-term benefit.
And that gets to the question of governance itself, where there is little governance, or where corruption is normal. It's hard to figure out how do you solve this problem, but you've attacked that, and we'll get more into that with the patrols and things. Wow. Don't go too fast. Each one is mesmerizing.
So these photographs were all kind of outtakes over kind of, a dozen years, 10 years. And there were various reasons why they were kind of rejected. So this photograph, I already had these chimp portraits, and I just thought, well, he's not really looking into camera, he's not really posing for me. So it was a reject. However, in this context, in this setting, it suddenly took on a much more, for me, powerful emotional resonance, so that he appears to me to be lamenting the lost world in which he once inhabited. And I found that I was able to resurrect quite a few photographs. This is a glorious matriarch called Kumquat. And she and two of her daughters were killed 2 weeks after that photograph was taken by a poacher, a really bad poacher. Well, not that there's a good poacher, but anyway. And the reason I rejected that photograph initially was because the baby his head was concealed, and just again, if you're taking a portrait of human beings, you're gonna, or I would, reject a group portrait if somebody's head is blocked. So but then in the context, this new context, I hope, that baby appears to be cowering from the trucks thundering by either side, and suddenly the weakness of the photograph becomes a strength. So, and that's a kind of fairly common thread through the selection of these. This is another one. Again, the giraffe was turned away from me. I thought, yeah, it's okay. But now, in this context, he appears to be looking over the world which he once inhabited, now changed, and then with the very pleasant surprise of those three War of the Worlds-like cranes.
Do you want to take a question or two from the audience in the middle here, or do you want to wait till...
I'm fine. If somebody wants to ask a question about any photos,
if there's a burning question right now, one or two, and then we'll keep going. Get back there.
If you go back to that last photo, what I like about that is it seems the elephants are forming a circle.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, exactly. And that was why I selected that location where there was that road junction. So they kind of were they were circling the wagons. Which way do they turn? Yeah.
Oh, over here, one more.
Sorry, yes.
How did you come up with the idea of actually physically building your portraits there? Because nowadays, obviously, with Photoshop, unfortunately, it makes it so much more real, obviously, and it's phenomenal work.
Yeah, it's a very good, important question because, of course, nowadays everybody thinks everything is photoshopped. And there's really nothing like shooting for real. And yeah, I could have stuck all this in Photoshop and I could have saved myself a huge amount of aggravation and time and money, and we'd be all here sitting here a year ago instead of today. But there are so many, it's the beauty of happenstance, of unexpected things that happen, like those cranes. I sort of stumbled upon this quarry when another location wasn't working. We went down there, we got the permission, put that up there. I kind of knew one crane was going to be there at some point, but I didn't know 3 were going to show up. And just waiting for completely unexpected things to happen. Also, well, hold on, let's just see what's completely... I mean, it's what you can come up with in Photoshop, to me, can never beat what happens in real life. So there's just things that occur, and there's that kind of, I can't think of a better word than organic, interaction between, in this case, the panel and what's around it, and also the light, waiting for this kind of really gloomy, Northern European, wintry, somber, melancholic light that I like in the tropics. Just the light that occurs and the way that interacts with the panels and the way that people eventually, I'm just going through, checking to see if there are any kind of, so it's not like I went in thinking, oh, I'm going to have the kids looking just as lost as the cheetahs. They're all off looking like, where am I going? What am I doing here? That's just something that happens unexpectedly. Yeah.
And you have a question?
Well, if he goes back to the chimp that's looking down, it looks like he has a baby, or she has a baby.
No.
No?
No, just looking...
Not that one.
Yeah, the next one.
The other one.
No, that's just...
It looks like he has a baby.
They're just kind of contemplating, just like we do.
He's sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here's this quarry again. I was kind of a bit reminded when I was taking these of Salgado's extraordinary gold mine photographs from South America, and I was always hoping that the quarry would fill up with as many people as those gold mine shots, but it didn't, so there you go. But it's still, a former world of...
Well, and it says something about just the mechanization that's happening.
Yeah. And actually, if you look at that bulldozer, it's Chinese. It's got Chinese calligraphy on it, and it's actually called Mzungu, which is Swahili for white man. So this is a soda factory down in the south, and again,
amazing.
It's
Fanta. Isn't it? Fanta is like everywhere in the world.
Soda as in soda.
Oh, okay.
And again, just using shots that suddenly, for me, the way his head is positioned, it kind of becomes a bit melancholy. Again, industrialization charging through.
Amazing.
Complete, again, happenstance. I was hoping a train would come through, and then within an hour it did. And this is actually a pretty important photo for me. So throughout the series, I wanted everybody to be oblivious to the animals within their environment. Just that they were kind of ghosts in the landscape, and just sort of another era. But just at the end, I wanted somebody to acknowledge what used to be there. And there was always a danger that with a little baby it would be sentimental, but for me it was all about that I think when we are born we have a natural, instinctive connection to nature, and that as time passes through to societal pressure, peer pressure, whatever, kids can lose that connection. And hopefully you get it back, or you never lose it, one way or the other. So, and just as an example of, again, of happenstance, that little kid on the right of the panel just walking in and touching that elephant trunk was just totally unexpected. But all these people here are homeless, and they're high on glue. And there are pregnant mothers high on glue. There are mothers with 1-year-olds. There's, you can see try and reach in, there's that baby lying on the ground. And all these kids, they've got empty bottles stuck to their mouths, noses, filled with glue, and they are completely out of it. Their motor control is beginning to go. There's no societal support.
Wow.
And, you know, it's, again, they are the victims too. And over and behind is a billboard with a middle-class man leaning back in his chair, and the tagline for that ad is, "Lean back, your life is on track." Again, I couldn't have ever thought of that for Photoshop. That's just real life.
Wow.
And just the way that the ground, it looks like the trunk is actually on the, and this, again, it's just the way it turned out.
It's unbelievable.
The trunk looks like it's on the ground there. So, at the end, again, another advantage of it all being real life is I was there for probably, I don't know, 6-7 days, over 2 shoots. And by the end of it, the kids were really, really accustomed to us being there. And a storm came in, and I wasn't allowed to talk to them because there were child labor laws, and I couldn't even ask somebody to go and sit in a shot. I just had to see what happened. And, oh, that's just another angle with a rhino. There's another example of happenstance. Who would have thought of asking a kid to put a jacket over their head like that? And it's just, you know. So this was on the final evening, and the storm came, the kids came under protection, and then they just started posing. Some of them started posing for camera. Obviously others were completely out of it. And it's just a crop detail. To me, it's really important because you see the victims finally turn and face us, the viewer, and hopefully you'll get an impression that, as I said, these are the victims too.
What is glue?
Sorry?
What is glue?
Glue, yeah.
Whenever you're ready to get onto big life.
Well, just, again, one of the other obvious observations here is just that this transition to an urban Africa, as you just said, it's not just the animals who are changed forever. The other thing that happens in terms of that connection with nature is, and I've written about this before in other contexts, including our relationship to the ocean, we have shifting baselines of perception, so that each generation grows up with a new sense of what's normal. For us,
yes.
I've been to the Arctic 4 times and written a lot about climate change in the context of the Arctic and sea ice. And like when I was a kid, my dad's books, most of which I have now, were about the Arctic, were about these kind of white explorers who would go up there and freeze to death. It was a harsh, forbidding wilderness that, unless you were an Inuit, was not a place you would ever go. And now the Arctic for my boys is a place where it's normal for shipping to go over Russia to Asia and to Europe, and where polar bears are in trouble, not because they're being shot too much, which was the case in the 50s, but because the sea ice is going away. So our sense of what's normal, and including not just these kids who are so desperately poor and in trouble, but the middle class in Africa too is growing up with this urbanization and the stresses on wildlife being the norm, not an OMG thing, you know.
I mean, there is that ongoing progression of diminishment, if there's such a word.
Yeah.
Where what the grandfather saw compared to what the father saw, what the father saw compared to what the son saw, and each generation we come to just either resignedly accept or be wonderstruck by what remains. And, in the oceans, when you go scuba diving now, and what you see now versus 8 years ago, and
right.
It's just, but you have to kind of keep remembering what was there and what can still be there.
Right. Has this been seen at all by sort of the governing class in Nairobi or?
No, not yet. And I think it's actually very important in an ideal world that this, I would like and hope that where it can actually have an impact is in those countries where this is happening. Mm-hmm. And it's all very well for us sitting here in America to be going, oh God, isn't this awful? But yeah, I mean, I would like to have exhibitions of this and be talking to and connecting with people who can actually affect that change and understand that the long-term benefit of preserving your environment.
Well, that makes a good transition to the other side of you, which is how you're using this in terms of policy and conservation.
This is a map of elephant distribution, and what it used to be. The deep green on the left is elephant distribution as it used to be, and then as you can see from on the right, 2011, what it is now, and where it's red is where the elephants have been most wiped out. And Big Life, who, you know, is that orange blob right there. So just to give you a perspective of just diminishment, as I was, there is that such a word, right?
Yeah, sure. And now there is, yeah.
Okay. I'm just, yeah, okay.
I think it's a good word. Go for it.
So just to come back to grim reality, these are, you know, a few shots of elephants that were killed by poachers with Big Life rangers standing by over the last few years. This is an amazing bull called Tawnir, who was quite famous and then was killed by a poison spear. So we come to Igor. So Igor, that was taken in 2007, and he was killed 2 years later in 2009. I discovered that when I went back. I finished the last book in 2008, went back in 2010, and discovered so many elephants suddenly being killed on an almost weekly basis by poachers. And there was really nobody doing very much. There just wasn't there wasn't the funding for either government bodies or NGO bodies. And poachers were coming over from Tanzania and killing elephants and then just escaping back over the border with impunity. And so Igor kind of became this kind of poster child, because I just thought it's better to be angry and active than angry and passive. Being angry and passive is just, you just end up miserable, depressed, despairing, frustrated, etc. So starting Big Life with my wonderful partner Richard Bonham, who lives in East Africa, we started Big Life and began to build ranger outposts, hire rangers, and so that's how the area looked in 2010, with just a few camps, and by 3 years later there were 30 plus camps, and now there's 40 on both sides of the border. And with that, poaching has dramatically reduced. This is some of the Big Life rangers, but to put it in perspective, we have 300 rangers. That's 300 rangers, which could fit in this room without a problem. So how the hell do 300 rangers that fit inside this room possibly protect 2 million acres? And the answer is through the support of the local communities. This is absolutely the key to the future of conservation in East Africa. If the conservation supports the community, then community will support conservation. So here's one of our rangers and his family, and every time a poacher comes in, almost every time a poacher comes in, we get to hear about it, because each one of those rangers has got a mother, father, brother, sister, whatever, who will alert the person he knows who is a ranger, to such a degree that in the region, only last year 3 elephants were killed by poachers, compared to what it was beforehand. And I just had to include those just for no good reason other than we also have tracker dogs who are unbelievably, the best source of unbelievably effective at tracking down poachers. Poachers think they have this supernatural ability to track them down many kilometers. And so wherever the dogs are, poaching diminishes massively. And as a result, wildlife starts recovering. Here's a camera trap shot with some lions, which have also, one of the other things Big Life does is it's very unsexy, but it works, which is it provides compensation to livestock herders for the livestock that have been killed by lions, hyenas, whatever. And as a result, it's one of the few areas left in Africa where the lion population is really growing.
That's interesting.
It was down just half a dozen, and now it's up around 200. It's as I say, it's not a sexy kind of thing because it's just you're handing out money as compensation, but it works.
Although that same model is successful, the Wilderness Society in Montana has a similar program with ranchers for losses from wolves to wolf predation on livestock, and it creates much more buy-in from the community that owns a lot of the land or has the grazing rights if you have that built into the system. You can even take that to the climate arena where if there isn't compensation and retraining and policy aimed at mining communities that are going to be shut down as we move away from coal, then you'll have a lot more resistance to the change. But if you work with those communities in the same way, you can foster the change.
Yeah. I mean, it really is the key because ultimately the biggest problem is not poaching. The biggest problem is there are too many of us. And the loss of habitat. And so, for example, though I mentioned 3 elephants were killed by poachers last year, 8 were lost to human-wildlife conflict. As the farmland progresses further, encroaches further and further into wildlife habitat, there is more and more conflict. And that's really the big, scary Megillah as time progresses, which we're trying to address.
But by the way, that's another value of the photography of this project, because you're showing that transitional landscapes. The elephant image in front of the transformed area. But it's, as you said a minute ago about compensating for losses, it's a much less sexy story to tell than who was the veterinarian, or not the doctor who shot the lion. That gets all of our attention, but the habitat loss is in the background. And how do you tweet and Instagram about something as amorphous as land development? It's really interesting.
Exactly.
So I'm glad that's part of your...
It kind of has to be. I mean, just even, as I was doing this project, Inherit the Dust, I had that learning curve where when I began, I was still thinking it was more poaching and just spending time in these built-up areas and in these growing areas. I began to realize, Jesus, this is actually really what it's about. And I don't think the photographs can actually show you the real scale of development. I've done the best that I can, but when you're actually there, it's just kind of it's kind of terrifying. But as I say, it has to be addressed in a very, very pragmatic fashion. That this is of ultimately, well, not that, but that is of ultimately more value. That's again that's Kilimanjaro. Just there you go, up there. Had to end on a couple of kind of nice, happy, sunny shots of happy elephants and happy big life rangers. And
That's Ambercelli?
That's Ambercelli, yeah. And this is not a fundraiser for Big Life, of course. However, of course, I obviously do want to use this opportunity to just kind of plug Big Life and say, if any of you would be considering donating to Big Life, we are doing an incredibly effective job at preserving an entire 2 million acre ecosystem that is only going to become more and more valuable and precious as other areas in Africa are lost. And it's a kind of Sophie's choice. You have to kind of be very, again, pragmatic is the word I keep using tonight. You have to be very pragmatic about which areas you think you've got a chance of saving. And this area is one of them. So I know probably nobody here was planning on donating tonight, but I'm just putting it out there because it doesn't hurt to ask. even as an English person who's typically way too shy about asking for money.
Are there more questions at this point? Yeah, here.
Does the Kenyan government work with you at all?
Yes, and that's actually one of the, to be effective in conservation, you really need support of the government, and you need the support of the local communities. And in Kenya, you actually, where we are, we have both, because the Kenyan government is increasingly realizing that they are sitting on a gold mine in the form of, say, elephants. There was one really interesting statistic, dangerous when you say it's interesting because maybe actually very boring to you, but the value of a single elephant to a poacher and a dealer is $20,000, and none of that ends up with the local community. Whereas an elephant during the course of its lifetime is estimated to be $1.6 million. Much of which will end up back with the local community. So there you have a perfect example, I hope, of the value of conserving wildlife. It's not just for privileged white people to come and go ooh and ah at the elephants. So yeah.
And by the way, whale watching is far more valuable now in most places where there are whales than whaling ever was. So you can have these transitions here and then, well, lots of questions. So there and then in the back and then here.
I have two questions. One, are you participating in the census? The elephant census?
You mean the one that Paul Allen's doing?
Yes.
It'll just be, I mean, they'll inevitably be doing the population count. Amboseli is actually one of the places it has increased. It's actually gone up from 1,800 to 2,000 in the last few years, which is quite something considering the devastation everywhere else.
Great. And the second question is, can you just talk a little bit about the Masai Olympics?
Ah.
That's such a great program.
So the Masai Olympics is something that one of the board of directors of Big Life, who's actually doing a fundraiser in New York tomorrow night, Tom Hill, founded, and it was a way of getting the Masai warriors. There's this kind of initiation that's part of their tradition that the warriors go out and they have to kill a lion. And of course, there ain't a lot left. So the idea was to kind of funnel that energy into this thing called the Masai Olympics, where they train and compete. Each group ranch area trains and competes against the other, and then at the end, David Rudisha, the 800-meter Olympic medal winner from Kenya, is a sponsor, and they get a scholarship to, go to college and study under his tutelage, etc., etc. So we're doing our second one this December, and it's, as I said, it's just in terms of this understanding of the value of the lions. So the single most important thing that the community appreciates in what we do, aside from the fact that Big Life is the biggest employer in the area, is that we make an effort to compensate those herders for the loss of their livestock. They don't care so much if an elephant gets killed because it doesn't personally affect them. But the fact that we have all these rangers out every single night patrolling farmland, helping the farmers from having their crops annihilated by a rowdy elephant trampling their annual income of tomato crop, the fact that we help with that livestock, that's a huge deal. And so they really feel like we are there working with them, and we won't let them down. I see too many NGOs go into places and basically kind of give hope and then just go, oh, we've run out of money, and abandon. And I understand, money runs out, but we try and only commit to moving into an area when we believe we can sustain that and not get people's hopes up, only to abandon them, which is ultimately worse than if you never went in to begin with.
Great. There was a hand up, there, and then there was right here somewhere. Yeah.
I have a question more on the artistic aspect of the work. Over the years, it has become a lot more somber and dark, which reflects reality.
And the fact that I'm a melancholy Jewish git, but yes, go on.
But on the other hand, your foundation does such an amazing job. You yourself foresee in the future that you're going to bring a little your work just to show that all hope is not completely lost?
Well, all hope is not lost. Look, I know that I'm going to go to my deathbed angry, because I know that these problems are not going to go away in our lifetime. But I have to keep on doing what I can to try and let people know this is what is happening. And I think I was thinking about this the other day with what were nature documentaries, and to me it almost seems at this point irresponsible to put out nature documentaries about this apparent land of wonder and plenty when it isn't that anymore. And it gives people a false impression. It makes people think, oh, everything's kind of fine, when it's not. And it's happening at such an incredible pace. But there is hope, because otherwise I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. You just have this Sophie's choice where you choose your battles. We can't possibly hope to win all of them.
The question I had is just seeing the progression in your work and looking at the pictures of the last push.
Yeah.
You're just
Getting more and more depressed.
What will be next?
I don't, yeah, I know. Tell me about it, I know. I don't know. I don't know what the next stage is, but I know it's not going to get sunny again anytime soon. It's in my DNA now, I think. Sorry.
Yeah, someone, it was, who was that? Yeah, you, and then sort of work down the road. Yeah.
I think you mostly answered my question. It was about, I mean, the salaries that the Rangers receive is, fairly
Low.
minimal, and then there's that temptation, I guess, to give information, or
Yeah.
how did you? It sounds like you really built the trust of the community.
It's a very good question. It's in that, yes, salaries are low, but they are stable. And poaching is a very precarious business. And now that there's a Wildlife Act in place, that in the Kenyan Constitution, for example, and that they're getting more severe about it in Tanzania, it's a precarious profession to be a poacher. And to my absolute astonishment, after 5 years, we have not had a single ranger be discovered to be playing both sides. And some of the best rangers are actually ex-poachers, because they understand the mentality. The guy who runs the dog unit, he's an ex-poacher, and he's incredible. And there's a look. It's kind of, I think it's kind of like so many former hunters become conservationists.
Yeah.
So I think it's the same with a lot of poachers, and so we haven't had anything bad happen yet.
So there, and then here.
My question is about the placement of the big photos in the urban landscape. Did you have some sort of criteria of how close within a habitat for a certain animal it was? Like you said, that giraffe was taken 10 miles away from a certain place, or would you say, like, it's got to be within the last 10 years?
No, good question. No, I didn't. Generally, everything but the chimps would have been there within the last 50 years. And I didn't actually try and figure out, obviously central Nairobi is going to be longer than where the soda factory is. The chimpanzees were there millennia ago. They did once upon a time live in Kenya, but it's millennia ago. So there was, I pushed it there because, interest of production, it was too far to go to Rwanda or Tanzania or Uganda.
So who was the other person there? And someone in the back, or you? Okay, you.
Sure. I'm just curious. What do you feel about the burning of the ivory? Do you really think that helps?
Yes.
The burning of the
ivory. Yeah, burning of the ivory.
Right.
It's obviously a very contentious issue, because some people say when you burn the ivory, that money could be used for conservation programs. Unfortunately, it kind of doesn't work out that way, because the money doesn't end up where it should. And I think the money with the ivory burning, years ago down in southern Africa, they worked out a tiny percentage ended up back in conservation programs. I mean, minuscule. I can't remember the numbers. While that ivory exists, it can end up back on the market. The Kenya Wildlife Service, for example, has ivory strong rooms where they store the ivory. That's where those ivory tusks, where those tusks came from for those photographs I showed early on. Well, they don't always stay. Some disappear. And they've found ivory that was marked up as seized in East Africa or wherever, and they found it showing up in when they've seized ivory coming into Hong Kong or China or wherever. So to me, the absolute simplest, hardest, you should just get rid of it and get rid of it. You don't agree?
I don't quite get it. Because it seems to me that if you, in my fantasy world, have an auction, a worldwide auction run by Sotheby's, control the money that you bring in, and let these guys in Asia or wherever they are that want it so much, let them, spend all their money, and then funnel that money where it could do some good for them. And also, that ivory belongs to these countries. And we, white people, go and, we're going to tell you what you should do.
But those countries are now destroying their ivory. There's a massive ivory burn in Kenya.
At our behest.
Trust me, Kenyan government's not going to do something to keep us happy. They are destroying it because they've gotten the message sufficiently through local conservationists like Paula Kahumbu, who's the most influential conservationist in East Africa. Paula Kahumbu. She runs Wildlife Direct, which was started by Richard Leakey. And for me, she's the most influential conservationist in East Africa. Not kind of on the ground, but just in policy. And they wouldn't be doing it if they didn't feel... Hong Kong's doing it. China. It's good. Sorry, yes.
Let me just add something to that.
Yeah.
In 2008, before the auctions, the Chinese and Japanese delegations got together and agreed on a fixed price, which undermined the whole process. Okay? That occurred. Secondly, if you think you can tell Richard Leakey that he can do anything, you have another problem.
The same issue, the same debate is going on with Rhino Horn. In fact, there too, there's now a startup company that's making a fake rhino horn that you can manufacture. It's keratin. It's the same as your fingernails, and they're hoping to flood the market in a way that would make the illicit product worthless. But you're in this constant. It's like the drug trade. There's still a debate about how much is enforcement, how much is a crackdown and governance, and how much is moving people onto methadone and then off of drugs. And there's no easy answers there. But you can see what's happened as long as you're sustaining the market in a way. Like if there's legal ivory or legal rhino horn, you're kind of sustaining enough of a market that gives cover to the illicit trade as well. And in Vietnam, I wrote about this a couple of years ago, the smugglers, many of whom are smuggling drugs or guns and other stuff as well, they're inventing new markets. Like in Vietnam, apparently, rhino horn has become a club drug. It's like even though it has not even in the medicinal history of rhino horn was it ever a club drug. But so they're kind of like marketing it in new ways. So that's like an endless process. So if there isn't a clampdown on supply, it's hard to see how that can work out. And I'm still open-minded in some aspects.
And also remember that this whole thing started in 2008 with the incredibly naive decision by CITES for the one-time sell-off of ivory under this crazy delusional notion that it would deflate demand. And of course, what it did, it enabled markets to open up under the guise that, this is actually legal ivory, when it was illegal ivory, and we've been dealing with the consequences of that ever since. Yeah.
And I want to ask you about China too. It would be great for this to be shown, these pictures to be seen and exhibited in China as well. Is that a frontier for you, or?
I'd like to. I mean, we're only a couple of weeks into the release of this, but yes. I mean, one of the things we were talking about earlier is getting these photos seen by those kind of people before these animals and these ecosystems are gone.
Yeah. When I did my .earth post with Ivan or Igor?
Igor's
image, I had a grad student at Pace who's Chinese, and I asked him to translate it into Chinese, and I posted another version of the story in the Times website in Chinese. So I was trying to kind of do what we could do to sort of bring it over there. It's challenging though, because actually the New York Times is not easy to read in China. So,
oh, really?
But it's possible. I'm sorry, yeah, right here.
Just to address what you just said, could you talk about the devastation outside of Kenya that's going on in terms of the African elephant population in the rest of Africa?
Yeah.
The question was about the overall picture for elephants.
So
it's about 100 elephants a day.
Yeah, so basically we're down to probably around 300,000, 350,000 elephants from what was, of course, 5 million at the beginning of the century. And when we talk about 2,000 where we are, it's like, you know, however, there are, big sigh, there are, you know, many reasons why elephants are still being annihilated in different parts of Africa. I'm sure you all know about the issue of the funding of terrorism. It's just very, very easy money. And then there's government corruption. So, for example, one of the worst places, the worst place in East Africa is this huge reserve in Tanzania called the Selous. And about 10 years ago, that had a population of about 60,000. And now last year it was 11,000. Clearly it's less now. And quite frankly, it's government corruption, underfunding of rangers, and then raiding parties which can easily get the ivory out with various payoffs. I mean, basically, I'm kind of wary of saying that, but that is what is going on there. And but like I said, I think, and then of course there's Central Africa, and then all the groups like Lord's Army coming down and annihilating the forest elephants there. We don't have to deal with terrorists in our area, fortunately. So it doesn't get military. We haven't yet had a ranger killed. In other areas up north, in northern Kenya, for example, there's much more potential military interaction. Or in Chad, where what's the name of that park? Zagora. Yeah. Sorry? Sakuma, thank you. Where there's a group called African Parks who have been allowed by the government. This is one of the big things that really helps, again, with the government support. African Parks is this great organization, and they were given permission by the Chadian government to operate anti-poaching units there, and the numbers hopefully will start to recover. But this is serious military operations. So everywhere's different.
I think we have time for one more question. I've been signaled way in the back there. And you can always send an email or tweet. He's on Twitter now. I just started, right?
Yeah.
Nick Brandt photo?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but anyway.
Email's easier.
Related to the question about China, are there programs in countries where the demand is very high to try to dissuade or inform, consumers or people who demand ivory?
Well, this is the key. It's not just about prevention of killing. It's also about suppression of demand. And the one organization I always rave about, who you should also send your money to, is Wild Aid. And I think they do an amazing job at getting the message out throughout the Far East about all sorts of different, with Rhino Horn and shark fin. They've been incredibly successful. They've been responsible, well, I think significantly responsible for that 80% reduction in shark fin consumption over the last couple of years.
They started working on that in 2005.
Yeah, but it's we're talking about China alone is 1.2 billion, and then there's Vietnam and Cambodia, and America, by the way.
Yeah.
So let's not kid ourselves. America's the second leading country for importation of ivory. Charles de Gaulle Airport in France has the highest importation of endangered animal parts. So it's nowhere's clean.
I agree about it. Wild 8 is great. I've written about them in terms of both shark fin and ivory. And they've used social media very cleverly with Yao Ming, the big basketball player, and Jackie Chan and other people who help them spread the word. I think we are out of time. So thank you all for coming. What a great
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.